Hey guys, welcome to the Way Wednesdays. I'm your host, Doug, and I've got with me Gary.
Oops.
Yeah. Hey, brother. It's great to see you. Oh, man.
Likewise.
Yeah, man. Tell you, the Way Wednesdays is always fun. We do a virtual Midrash where we go through the word together. Midrash means that we study. It just means study, all right? Virtual, I think you guys know that by now. Um, and we've been going through the Parashat HaShavua, which is the portion of the week. So that means that there's a portion in the Torah, there's a portion in what's called the Haftarah, which is the dividing, and that means so something in the prophets, essentially, somewhere in the prophets or the historical writings. And we have something in the New Testament, the writings of the apostles. And it's been great. And of course, we're up to this amazing feast of Sukkot, Tabernacles. And I'll tell you, Gary, this is what we've all been waiting for, right? I mean, it's like when you look at the calendar, it's like it's a story in and of itself, right? We start with the calling and the redemption of mankind out of Egypt, out of slavery, right? And then he takes us to Sinai, and we enter into a covenant. Things go bad, and the whole covenant falls apart, right? So then he sends Jesus. He cancels that first contract, sets up a new one, and then he calls us into the newness of that new covenant relationship. And then the whole thing is to come back together. And of course, when you think about when we started back in the Garden of Eden, the whole point of this creation thing was so that we and God could hang out. And that's what brings us up to tabernacles, right? So God's desire is to tabernacle among us. And that's it. That's the end of the story. I mean, that's the big climax, and it's so awesome.
And I think that's a really fascinating insight. One of the most wonderful parts about living a life that follows the Torah, that follows the biblical calendar, that embraces the feasts and the festivals of God, because every year, well, for one, from Sabbath to Sabbath, you get to experience the redemption of God, the rest of God, the peace that He gives us. But through the cycle of the calendar and the festivals, we really understand and live out His redemption, His redemptive work. From Passover through Sukkot, we get to see it from beginning to end, and actually live, eat, do, interact, discuss. That's one of the things I like about our Midrash time too, is that it really is a discussion. And I want to welcome everybody who's joining in the chat. If you're just watching and you're not on the chat, I'd invite you to join in the chat, because I think one of the highlights that we have in our Midrash is the ability to make it interactive, to take your questions. This sort of sprouted from our Shabbat Plus meetings, which is where we get together. We're all gathered in a group, and it's just an open forum, and we discuss respectfully and bring our own experiences, our own insights, and that's kind of an expectation for our audience as well. So this is not just Doug and Gary, having a conversation back and forth. Although I love to do that with you, Doug, you know that. Sure. I think one of the most fulfilling parts is really getting the rest of the groups involved in the Midrash. So if you're listening, put your questions out there. We're going to be talking about some really interesting stuff tonight. We've been focusing these ever since Tisha B'Av on the Haftorah portions, on the portion from the prophets. Tonight will be no different. And again, the rabbis of old have set up these Haftorah portions to guide us into this redemptive moment that we see at Sukkot. And we've been going along on that ride for 8-9 weeks now, and it has really been insightful. So maybe without any further ado, other than to make a plug for our trip to Israel. So this is going to be just really a once-in-a-lifetime experience. To come and join us in Israel, we're going to be going in April of 2021. Right now, you may very well know that Israel is in a lockdown through the holy days. as they get a handle on what's going on over there with the pandemic. We're trusting that this is going to be resolved, and we're moving forward in faith. And everybody I've been talking to over there is of the same mindset. Tonight, if you can register tonight and just put down a $500 deposit, you will save $100. The price goes up tomorrow, just $100. So we had this early registration discount that expires tonight. So if you're thinking about it, again, you can register. You can register up until, I think, February, even March, for the trip. So if you want to save a little money and you can do it tonight. I've had some people ask me, it's like, I'm a single person. Is it possible to get a roommate? Because there is a premium of like $1,000 extra if you want a single room. And I'm saying, yes, just register a thing you want to share a room with somebody. We'll link up like genders. So women stay with women, guys stay with guys, but you don't have to. Don't let that hold you back. Go ahead and sign up. Sign up as a dual occupancy room, and we'll make sure we get you a roommate. And that's always fun too, because you get to experience the day with somebody, and it's like, oh my gosh, we were here, and did you see this, and it was so exciting, and did you try that food and this food? And it really makes it fun when you can share your experiences with somebody else. So enough of that. Sign up tonight if you can, but if you can't do it tonight, sign up, period. Join us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to give a shout out to some people. We got Carolyn from Ohio. We've got Hannah from Maryland. We've got Jeff Warner from our good old city of Lakewood. And Elizabeth Evers is out there. Hello, Elizabeth. Great to see you. Yeah. And Gary, let's take a question before we get into the Torah. Tanzi has a question. This is an interesting one. All right. Are we called to vote for a Caesar or president? Interesting.
Good question.
Well, yeah, it is a good question, and I guess the way I would look at it is that we're citizens of the United States of America. So we have the privilege of taking part in that election process. In countries where it's an autocracy, then no, you don't, right? But where we have that option, where that responsibility has been entrusted to the people, then, I think all we can do is vote to the best of your conscience, right? And, we're going to have differences of opinion, even within, the same Christian circles, we're going to have some differences of opinion. And I think, again, we just have to do the best that we know to do. So, I'm not about to tell anybody who they need to vote for. I think that's something that everyone needs to do some careful research, certainly pray about it, and then vote as you believe God would have you do. And then we leave the results up to him, because, we'll probably get who we deserve, and God will still be on the throne. So that would be my thought about that. So, all right, let's jump into Zechariah chapter 14. Okay, without further ado, all right, here we go. Behold, the day of the Lord is coming, and your spoil will be divided in your midst. For I will gather all the nations to battle against Jerusalem. The city will be taken, the houses rifled, the women ravished. Half of the city shall go into captivity, but the remnant of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Then the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations as he fights in the day of battle. And in that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall be split in two from east to west, making a very large valley. Half of the mountain shall move toward the north, and half of it toward the south. Then you shall flee through my mountain valley, for the mountain valley shall reach to Azal. Yes, you shall flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. Thus the Lord my God will come, and all the saints with you. Wow. What a dramatic entrance there, Gary. I'll tell you, that is pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah,
It's
I
very
would. I
exciting.
would say let's just stop at the first sentence, because the day of the Lord is coming. I mean,
Yeah.
need we read any further? It's like this is it. Prepare. The
Hmm.
day of the Lord is coming.
Hmm.
If that doesn't kind of shake your foundation, it certainly should, because when we meet the Lord face to face, that's like, oh my gosh, the awe, the glory, the splendor, the fear.
Mm.
It's like, oh my gosh, I tremble
Mm.
in your midst. Um,
Yeah.
it's
Do you
it's
think
a,
do you think we've lost the fear of the Lord to some extent? I mean, maybe not completely or everybody, but kind of in a general sense, it seems like to me, it seems like we have. I don't know.
well, I would agree with that, because we don't have anything that equates to that.
Mm.
We don't have anything that comes close to being in the presence of someone that we fear, respect, that is deserving of that honor. And once you do it, I mean, I mean, think back to, it's like, oh gosh, somebody you really idolize, whether it's somebody in music or entertainment or politics, or somebody is sports, right?
Mm.
I remember once back when I worked in the corporate world, I got tickets to the Broncos game, and I got to go
Mm.
down on the field, and I was like,
Wow.
oh my gosh, like I'm in the presence of these guys,
Yeah.
and it's like this is really, it's like, wow, this is amazing. Um, it doesn't even compare. It pales in comparison. It's like
I
I can't
know.
even. It doesn't even equate. It's not even going to be
Yeah.
close to that. So
Yeah.
no, I don't think we really understand what it's going to be like, and I think we'll just melt like a puddle, in terms of what being in the presence of God. And I just pray that I can stand there boldly and say, Lord, I've lived faithfully. I've stood for you, and I'm so glad to be here. And I know He'll be welcoming. I know it'll, this unparalleled love. And I like to think of stories you hear about these near-death experiences and things like
Hmm.
that, and you enter
Hmm.
into the presence of this light, and you just feel this overwhelming sense of love.
Mm.
And that's what I like to think that it's going to be like. I don't
Yeah.
know. Lord,
Yeah.
give me strength to be there in that day. Um,
Yeah.
um,
It's well said. I was just thinking about Nebuchadnezzar, how he was an absolute autocrat, and whatever he said went. And you did not want to offend the king because that could be the end of it. Or maybe Esther, going into the presence of the king, and if he didn't put forth his staff, then she was done, right? And so she fasted for 3 days, even though she was married to the guy, you know, but it could still be her life
yeah,
just by going into his presence. And I think we've lost that. We have really no sense of that for the most part as Americans. Maybe that big job interview or you're losing your job or something, but maybe the closest you could get would be the person that is a criminal and they're going to court and they know they're guilty and they're going into that court, and chances are their fate is going to be decided against them, right? And maybe that's the kind of that foreboding sense of, oh boy, this is it. We've kind of lost that, but the day of the Lord is coming, and this is what we've been talking about, for the last like 7 weeks, as you said, that this is it, right? This is the big moment. That's what we've been talking about. Let's repent
hmm
before God comes back. Because you know what?
hmm
He's coming back. And none of us are going to stand there proud and boastful and say, yep, I'm here. I am, Lord. It's a good thing you came when you did, because, I'm ready for you. And it's like, I don't think so. I mean, I agree with you. I think he's going to be very gracious to those that are expecting his return. And yet we're told in First Corinthians that if anyone builds on the foundation of Christ, that to be gold, silver, precious stones, or wood, hay, and stubble, and each one's work will be evident in that day, because it's going to be revealed by fire.
right.
Everybody, no exceptions, no exceptions. So with that in mind, I'm like, okay, I want to try to get things right before Jesus comes back. So I love this passage. I love Zechariah 14. I mean, I could spend quality time, and I have spent quality time, and I probably haven't spent enough quality time in this chapter because he's talking about, the end times. This is it. This is Armageddon. This is when he comes back. And I want to make this super abundantly clear is that Jesus is coming to defend his people, not to trash his people. Right? Preterist theology teaches that God came back on the dust clouds of the Roman army, or Jesus came back on the dust clouds of the Roman army to destroy Israel. It's so false. I really hate that doctrine because it just upsets me. And like Jesus is coming to fight on behalf of his people, not against them. Not against them. He's going to fight on behalf of his people. And this is going to be such an exciting day. And now, to get there, there's going to be some tribulation. I mean, notice that all the nations are going to be gathered against Jerusalem. The city should be taken, the houses rifled, the women ravished. I mean, this is really sad stuff, right? But then the Lord will go forth. All right, so he's coming, and he's going to fight against the nations that are fighting against Jerusalem. That means he's on the side of Jerusalem. That's really good news, and I just can hardly wait. And then his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. Now, I don't know about you, Gary. I've never really gotten a straight answer from a Jewish commentator on how God's own feet are going to stand on the Mount of Olives, right? It's clearly Yud He Vav He, right? This isn't an angel. This isn't somebody else. This is Yud He Vav He, and his feet are going to stand on the Mount of Olives. So to me, it seems like you might have a problem. One, if you think God is completely non-corporeal, right, that he has no body. Well, we see that he does have a body in Ezekiel chapter 1 and other places. Also, if God never shows up, if he has no manifestation, aka Jesus, then how's this going to work? So do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I don't. I don't think I've ever heard a good explanation from a Jewish perspective on how this actually plays out, other than they do believe that the mountain will split in two. And so that is a literal understanding. How that happens with God's feet touching down, I think is oftentimes interpreted in a metaphorical sense, not a literal sense, but definitely a literal breaking of the mountain.
Yeah, I mean, because it's so cool. I mean, the Lord will go forth. He's going to obviously come out of his place. We see that in Isaiah 26, other places. He will go forth, fight against those nations as he fights in the day of battle. It's interesting. I was talking to one of my students years ago, and he was somehow put off by this idea that God is a man of war. That God's going to be doing battle. Look, that God isn't doing battle every day, but there's a time for God to do battle. And you think about it, a father who loves his little tiny baby, right, is going to be tender and care for that little child and, say goo goo gaga and all that fun stuff. But if somebody tries to hurt that child, then the fatherly or motherly instinct will kick in and you will fight and you'll defend that child. And that's the idea here. Or, a man defending his wife, right? That you're defending the one you love. And of course you're going to fight because somebody is trying to destroy your beloved. So yes, you're going to fight. And that's what we have here, is that someone is trying to destroy God's beloved. And he's like, no, those days are over. Those days are gone. That is not happening ever again. I personally will come and fight. My feet will touch down on the Mount of Olives, and it's going to split. Now, the very fact that it's going to split and then people flee through this valley presents a very interesting little conundrum, I should say. I remember, back in the day when I just thought, okay, Jesus is coming back, and boom, we're done, right? But then I'm like, wait, I got to this passage. I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. I thought he comes, he snaps his fingers, and party's over, right? The war is over. But no, God's like, look, I'm just getting warmed up. If people want to fight against me, you go for it, right? Mm-hmm. And you almost get the sense he's like, you want to rumble? You want to rumble? Come on. I'll fight with my hands tied behind my back. I'll even close my eyes. Go for it, and there's no contest, right? But God's going to at least give people, kind of that fighting chance. And this, I think, takes our attention over to Isaiah chapter 63, where Isaiah asked the question, who is this who comes from Edom with dyed garments from Bozrah, this one who is glorious in his apparel, traveling in the greatness of his strength? I who speak in righteousness, mighty to save. Why is your apparel red and your garments like one who treads in the winepress? I have trodden the winepress alone, and from the peoples no one was with me. I have trodden them in my anger and trampled in my fury. Their blood is sprinkled upon my garments, and I have stained all my robes. For the day of vengeance is in my heart, and the year of my redeemed has come. I looked, but there was no one to help, and I wondered that there was no one to uphold. Therefore, my own arm brought salvation for me, and my own fury, it sustained me. I have trodden down the peoples, and my anger made them drunk in my fury, and brought down their strength to the earth. Whoa. I mean, God is not messing around. And so these two passages go together, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, they go together, and God is serious about this. Of course, Revelation 14, we have to pair that as well, where the blood's going to go up to the horse's bridle. So all of this is happening in Jerusalem. I would argue that this is Armageddon. This is the big war that we read about in Revelation 16 as well as 14.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's really interesting to begin to take a look at how God brings the nations against Jerusalem, and then he conquers the nations. And is it your sense, Doug, that this is part of the trial, the testing, the tribulation process, that the Lord tests his people, that he puts them basically through the fire, because there's such a contrast there, and it's separated by just a few verses. I will bring the nations against, and then I will conquer the nations.
Right. Yeah. Well, I always like to think that in the Bible, for the most part, we're just getting bullet points, right? We're just getting the basic schematic of what this is going to look like, right? We don't have all those fine details. Generally speaking, we don't have those fine details. So, he says, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. And then we have to kind of look in other places, because sometimes other scriptures are going to fill out those things, like we just read in Isaiah 63. But yeah, it's called the time of Jacob's trouble. And, we see that God is going to allow this time to test his people. When I think about God sending judgments, yes, in a sense he does, but in a sense he allows them. And in a sense, he's like, you know what? I can't even hold back this judgment anymore, because my righteousness won't allow me. I've sort of been holding back on this judgment because of your unrighteousness, Israel, because of your unrighteousness, oh, you believers. And I kept telling you not to do that. And it's like dogs that just keep pulling on the leash, and God's like, no, not yet, right? And then eventually he's like, okay, my righteousness says that I have to let them go, and then they just come. And so he allows that to work in the hearts of people, to test us, to see where we are. Are we really believing in him? Are we trusting him? Are we walking with him? Are we going to stay faithful to him? That's the big question, right? Because we're going to there's a marriage coming. And of course, you want to know, right? You want to know if your beloved that you're going to spend eternity with really does love you, or if she's just kind of into the money, if she's just into the perks, or he or whoever that may be. But that, is it true love, or is it just because I'm rich, right? Is it just because I'm famous, right? Or just because I give you a good lifestyle, right? You want to know. And so God is going to allow this situation, especially the tribulation, to let people make their choice. And some people are going to choose for the devil, sadly. And those that are faithful will remain faithful for the Lord. And so when that time comes, he is going to come and fight. And I think what we have to understand is that there are no other saviors. There's no other tough guys. There's no other intercessors, heroes that are left that can fight against the Antichrist or the beast. Now God himself comes and he's going to fight against this beast. And let's see here, getting right back into our text here. So Zechariah chapter 14. So it will be one day which is known to the Lord, neither day nor night, but at evening time it shall happen that it will be light. So when he comes back, his glory is going to fill the sky. And in that day it shall be that living waters shall flow from Jerusalem, half of them toward the eastern sea and half of them toward the western sea. In both summer and winter it shall occur. And the Lord shall be king over all the earth. In that day it shall be the Lord is one, and his name is one. All the land that shall be turned into a plain from Geba to Hermon, south of Jerusalem. Jerusalem shall be raised up and inhabited in her place, from Benjamin's gate to the place of the first gate and the corner gate, and from the tower of Hananel to the king's winepress. The people shall dwell in it, and no longer shall there be utter destruction, but Jerusalem shall be safely inhabited. All right, I'm going to just take a break right there because that is where the break is in the text. And so what happened is Zechariah goes from this time of him coming, the mountain splitting, and then he goes right into the age to come, or the millennial time that we speak of. And then he's going to go back and he's going to look at what happened before. So in the text, what we saw there is that the mountain is going to split. So let me just go back really quick here. So the mountain is going to split. I mean, this is pretty incredible when you think about the Mount of Olives. It's a pretty sizable hill. Mm-hmm. It's going to split in two, and then there will be a corridor, an east-west corridor that people are going to flee through. All right, it says, "You shall flee through my mountain valley, for the mountain valley shall reach to Azal." So who is fleeing? Well, I spent a lot of time putting this together, and I don't want to take too much time because I could take over an hour to explain this whole thing if I take too much detail. But it's really fun. I think it's fun anyway. But the word there for valley is the word gay. The same word as gay ben hinnom, right? So it's really a tight kind of valley, more like a canyon that God is talking about. So you have people that are apparently in the Kidron Valley. They're in the valley of Jehoshaphat, right? That's the same name. Kidron, Jehoshaphat, they're the same place. And we see that's talked about in Joel chapter 3, talking about the judgment in the valley of Jehoshaphat. In particular, Jehoshaphat means Yehovah judges. And it's also the same place that we have in Revelation 14, where the blood comes up to the horse's bridle. It makes much more sense in a canyon than on a wide open plain like Megiddo. So I'm very much of the opinion. Well, anyway, just that Armageddon is going to happen there. So go ahead.
I was going to ask, Doug, and is this the same as the Valley of Decision?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. All these things in the Valley of Decision, right? So, this is the place. This is where the epic battle is going to take place. And here's what's really cool about it, Gary, is that valley, which again, just literally, right, it's like a dog leg, just a little corner right around the corner from Gehenna. All right. So maybe, 2 stones throw to get over to Gehenna, not far away at all. But that area that we're talking about, right next to the old city, is in what's called the Emek Rephaim. It's in the valley of the Rephaim. Mm-hmm. And sadly, very sadly, this is where Solomon and others set up these what was called a Tophet, which was a place to sacrifice children to these terrible gods, to Baal, to Molech, all the same dude. It's all Satan. And this is where he's going to judge those false gods. He's going to judge them in that same place, which I think is so cool. And so as he splits the mountain, it says people are going to flee through. Hopefully people are having like a flashback, because this should remind you of something. This should remind you of some other time where you had some big walls and people went through them, right? Mm-hmm. That's the Exodus, of course. And I believe that is the second Exodus. I know there are other teachers that suggest that, somehow he's going to call people from different nations. They're going to start migrating. That's not my opinion. I respect that opinion, but it's definitely not my opinion. I think that Zechariah 14 is where we have very literally a second Exodus. And that's where he's coming to save his people. So it's pretty awesome.
So one of the things that I think it is real easy to do is to say, this is happening to Jerusalem. This is happening to Jews in Jerusalem. What happens to us? What happens to us in the United States? What happened to other people around the world? What happened to the non-Jews? How are they dealing with all of this? Do we see this on TV? What decisions do we make? Are we being tested at the same time? Or what decisions do we make? We're not in the valley of decision if we're not in Jerusalem.
Right. Well, yeah, we're not in that valley of decision. But I mean, we just have to read the book of Revelation a little bit. We know that there are going to be, millions and millions, perhaps billions of believers that will be martyred. And we see this in Revelation 7, 14 to some extent, 15, 20, that there are just oodles of people that were martyred because of their faith. When Satan is cast out of heaven, he comes down and he's wrathful against the woman, which is Israel, and against her offspring, who have the commandments and the testimony of Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. So he's going to go after believers of every flavor, color, nationality, etc., because he hates them. And there will be people that will be in Jerusalem. So that will be, I don't know if we want to call that a special dispensation or what. I don't know. But we know the story because it's in front of us. It's in this book. But this is the time of Jacob's trouble, and it's coming through that transition. And once we get through that, I say we as a collective whole, but that is when, of course, right after that, when Jesus comes back and he's done beating up everybody, right? In that general time frame is when we have the resurrection. It's when we have the gathering together of the saints. And, that's just what we have to really understand, is that God is going to gather his people because he wants to be with us. Whether we died or we made it through, he's going to gather us together so that we can be there at the marriage supper of the Lamb. So all of this, it has an endpoint. It has a destination, which is to be with God. And in verse 12, it says, this shall be the plague with which the Lord will strike all the people who fought against Jerusalem. Their flesh will dissolve while they stand on their feet. Their eyes shall dissolve in their sockets, and their tongues shall dissolve in their mouths. Now that's kind of yucky, but I've heard, various theories about this over the years. Well, this is talking about some kind of a nuclear blast or some kind of a, thermonuclear detonation or something like that. I'm of a different opinion. I think that when the bad guys are trying to follow after the remnant that's going through this new valley, and now Yeshua has interposed himself between his beloved that are escaping through this valley, and now the bad guys coming in. Just think about the Egyptians trying to follow the Israelites through the Red Sea. Well, instead of the walls collapsing, this is now where Jesus, he jumps in, and then they get too close to his face, and his face is it's like shining like the sun, right? So it's got these rays of light coming out of it. He's got rays of light coming out of his hands, according to Habakkuk chapter 3. And they start to melt because they're getting too close to the power source, which is Jesus. They're getting way too close. We know that in the day of the Lord that the elements are going to melt. We know that things are going to just start, Jesus is coming in flaming fire. And so the mountains themselves are going to start to burn. So people that get too close to God will burn. They will begin to melt. And I think that is really the simplest, most straightforward interpretation of that passage. So again, he's coming to fight for his people, not against his people.
Amen. Well spoken.
Thank you. So then we have in verse 13, it shall come to pass in that day that a great panic from the Lord will be among them. Everyone will seize the hand of his neighbor and raise his hand against his neighbor's hand. Again, I would suggest the bad guys who are at the front of the line now realize that the guys at the very front are melting, and so they try to turn around and they're trying to fight their way to the back of the line. But that's not working out, because if you've ever tried to go against a crowd, it can be very difficult, right? You have to fight your way through a crowd that's moving in a certain direction. And I think that's what people will be doing, and it's not going to work. So Judah also will fight at Jerusalem, and the wealth of all the surrounding nations shall be gathered together, gold, silver, and apparel in great abundance. Such also shall be the plague on the horse and the mule, on the camel, the donkey, and on all the cattle that will be in those camps. So shall this plague be. So, the animals that are there that are too close, sorry, they're going to melt as well. And it shall come to pass that everyone who is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. So now we're transitioning again back to that millennial period. And you're like, wait a second, how can there be nations that are left? Well, let's say that we have, I don't know, X number of people that have come from Syria, okay, and let's say 50. Let's just, for simplicity, 50% of Syrians signed up with the Antichrist, right? So they came. I suggest they come as hybrids. They came with the intent to destroy Israel. All right, so they're done. Their game is over, right? But the people that didn't, that refused to take the mark, and the ones that didn't die by being beheaded, the ones that are still alive, let's say that they never put their trust in Yeshua, they never made a profession of him being king, but they didn't take the mark of the beast. They did not do the evil things that the beast was trying to get them to do. I would suggest, based on this text, based on Isaiah 65, based on Matthew 25, that we're going to have essentially three groups of people at the return of Jesus. We have those who are true believers in Yeshua. We have those who have truly taken the mark of the beast. All right, so those groups are pretty easy. And then we have a middle group. That's the group that I would call the righteous unbelievers. Righteous unbelievers. So again, they never made a profession of faith in Yeshua, but neither did they sign up to go with the Antichrist. And so then they will enter into the millennial age as flesh and blood. They will have babies, and then lots of grandkids, etc. And then way at the end, there'll be a generation that will rebel, as we see in Revelation chapter 20. So we're talking about, these are now regular mortal humans, and they need to come up for the Feast of Tabernacles. And we see this several times in this text, right? So we've got the Feast of Tabernacles, and it shall be that whichever of the families of the earth do not come up to Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, on them there will be no rain. If the family of Egypt will not come up and enter in, they shall have no rain. They shall receive the plague with which the Lord strikes the nations who do not come up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. So what is it that their people are getting? Well, the plague is they don't get any rain. So if people will not come up during the Feast of Tabernacles, then they get no rain, right? So that's the whole thing. They don't have any rain because they're not willing to come up. This shall be the punishment of Egypt and the punishment of all the nations that do not come up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles, right? So how many times do we have it there? 3 or 4 times where he talks about the Feast of Tabernacles. I think that's pretty exciting, because that's telling us that the Feast of Tabernacles is very exciting. And you mentioned once to me that this seems to be the first real commandment, right? To sort of keep this feast in a sense. Or how did you say? You probably said it better than I.
The nations are really instructed to keep the Feast of Tabernacles.
The nations, right?
They're not necessarily instructed to keep Passover or Shavuot or Rosh Hashanah or any of the other feasts. They're very specifically told to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. I think it's very interesting regarding the rain that the Feast of Sukkot really marks the beginning of the rainy season. So if you're not going to come up for the Feast of Tabernacles, I mean, there are so many prayers involving, Lord, send your former rains in their seasons. That's the season that we're entering into right now, the Feast of Tabernacles. They have the water drawing ceremony that we read of in John chapter 8, 7. Yeah. Talks about the water drawing festival. All of those things surround the promise of the coming rain. But that's only there, obviously, if you come up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles, if you acknowledge the one who brings the rain, the one who gives the rain, the one who blesses you with the rain. And so it's really significant, I think, that the nations that do not comply with this request don't receive the blessings that he promises. And I think that's the case anytime. If we don't acknowledge the Lord for what he does in our lives, it's like, I just won't bless you with those things. I promise you lots of blessings.
Right. Yeah.
Just acknowledge me, understand. I love the one of the things that you brought out in your Hebrew class not that long ago. Again, just a short commercial. Anybody who's interested in Hebrew class, join us on Monday nights. Send me an email, Gary@thewaycongregation.com. I'll send you out an invite to be in the Hebrew class, 5 p.m. Monday nights, Mountain Time. But one of the things that you brought out is like in the blessing that we say when we open up the scroll, bless the Lord, the blesser. Blessed is the Lord, the blesser forever. He is the blesser. He is the one who is blessing you in the Aaronic blessing. The Lord will bless you. The Lord will keep you. The Lord will make his face to shine upon you. All of these are promises that he will give to us simply if we acknowledge him, understand that he is the source of all blessings, and we embrace him. Yeah.
I wanted to bring up where Jesus is saying this in John chapter 7. On the last day, the great day of the feast, Jesus stood and cried out, saying, "If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. He who believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water." Right? And of course, we have this in Revelation chapter 22. The Spirit and the bride say, "Come." Whoever's thirsty, come. So in fact, it's even more beautiful in light of Zechariah 14, where maybe you're thirsty because you haven't been coming, right? You're thirsty because you haven't been keeping the Lord's commandments. And it's beautiful. Even at the very end of the Bible, there's still an invitation. Come. I'm still gracious. I'm still merciful. Yes, you've been living in disobedience, but come and we'll work it out. God wants to extend his grace to the last second so that everybody can be in. But you have to make a decision. There's no question about that.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I think oftentimes we stop at the decision, and you and I have talked about this a number of times, where it's like you prayed the prayer and then you just go on with life as normal. When you make that decision, the decision you're making is for a new way of life, for a transformation, where some people say, "Oh, I live a Torah lifestyle." A lifestyle is different than a way of life. You can have lifestyles of the rich and famous, and that works really good as long as you're rich and famous.
Right. Yeah.
But when you're no longer rich and famous, the lifestyles of the rich and famous doesn't work for you anymore. However, if you are transformed and submit yourself to God, you now have a new way of living. It is a new way of life that becomes evident in every aspect of your life. One of the things that, as I early on in my walk as somebody who followed Torah, it became very apparent to me that so many decisions now become biblical-based decisions, from what I choose to eat, to the days that I choose to worship on, to the things that I wear. Very common daily occurrences become now part of my daily life. And it really does become a way of life. And in doing so, those blessings just begin to compound, because, no longer, as you're now walking a new way of life, no longer are you walking in the old ways. No longer are you thinking in the old ways. No longer are you following the paths that you once were, because, now you're concentrating on and thinking about, I have a new way of life. And that transformation just becomes more and more ingrained in your way of life, so that when your foundations do get tested, where things come in against you and you're shaken, it's like, no, I'm falling back to what my way of life is. And it's a really important concept, I think.
And I think our text really brings that out, that, there's going to be people who will be in the kingdom, who will see the king, and yet they're not going to take a break in their life to keep the Feast of Tabernacles, right? Why would you not keep the Feast of Tabernacles? Like, what else do you have to do, right? You have some fancy business meeting. You have a acquisition of a company. Are you, buying a new house? What is it that you're doing that's so important that you cannot take time out of your busy schedule in the age to come, when life is easy? How could it be, right? So there's this implicit sense of rebellion that's already brewing in that text. And of course, we see it come to its fruition in Revelation chapter 20, where when the devil is let out after 1,000 years, he goes out and he is going to deceive the nations again. But guess what? Those nations want to be deceived, right? And we see the seeds of that being planted, or should I say planted here in Zechariah 14, that there's already a sense that some people are not going to go up for the Feast of Tabernacles. And yet, you've got God dwelling with you. Why would you not go up? So when Satan gets out, he's a champion to those people, right? He's not a great temptation. He's not some terrible onus upon the world, but he's received as a hero, as a champion, as the person that's going to set them free from God's terrible ways, as it were. Which is, again, a crazy thought, isn't it?
It really is. But the rebellion that is in people, and again, I think rebellion takes takes different forms. It takes form in complacency. It's rebellion. You think, I'm angry. I'm this. I think rebellion takes the form of laziness. I think rebellion takes many forms that on the surface appear very benign, but unless you are an active follower of God, right, then rebellion can set into your soul. And then when the rain doesn't come, then you do get upset. Then you do get mad, and then you listen to the slanderer, and then you listen to the deceiver. It's like, I'll give you rain. Come on, all you got to do is follow me.
Right. Yeah. Or we'll go show.
Put up with this.
Yeah, we'll go storm the gates of King Jesus' kingdom and demand that he send us rain, or we'll
Right.
take the controls ourselves, and we'll make it happen or something like that.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
rebellion is a very subtle thing.
yeah,
I think the
yeah,
word is very strong, and the
yeah,
image that we have in our mind is, people setting things on fire and tipping over statues and, everything else like that. But oftentimes it's a very benign lack of action, whereas our faith should be action.
well said. Boy, that's well said. Well, two more verses here. In that day, holiness to the Lord shall be engraved on the bells of the horses, the pots, and the Lord's house shall be like the bowls before the altar. Yes, every pot in Jerusalem and Judah shall be holiness to the Lord of hosts. Everyone who sacrifices shall come and take them and cook in them. In that day, there shall no longer be a Canaanite in the house of the Lord of hosts. So, yeah, probably a lot more we could say there. I think for the sake of time, let's go to Revelation 21 because we're only almost out of time. But I really want to get to the sense of what is tabernacles. It's dwelling with God. This is the big climax to the story. Now I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for this first heaven and the first earth had passed away. Also there was no more sea. Then I, John, saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. God himself will be with them, and be their God. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. Then he who sat on the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. And he said to me, Write, for these words are true and faithful. And he said to me, It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give of the fountain of the water of life freely to him who thirsts. I'm going to just turn my cross references on, Gary, just to give people a sense of how many times, and this is not an exhaustive list, of the theme that God wants to dwell
Mm-hmm.
with his people, right? These are just some of the verses where we find this theme in Scripture. And this is what it has been from the beginning. God created Adam and Eve. He came walking in the cool of the evening, and Adam and Eve had blown it, right? But the whole point was that he wanted to have a relationship. He wanted to have fellowship. He wanted to have communication, right? He wanted to hang out. He wanted to laugh. He wanted to be silly. He wanted to joke. He wanted to play, right? He wanted to do all those things that, we enjoy doing with our children, or maybe with our spouse, or maybe with a good friend, just kind of having some fun. He wants to do all those things with us because he loves us, right? Because he's just got this love just flowing out of him. And he's like, I have to give it to somebody, and I wanted to make beings that were in my nature, in my likeness and my image, so that I could share my love and then they could share it back. God has feelings, and I think we forget that sometimes, that God has feelings. God's heart can and has been wounded by us, sadly.
Mm-hmm.
And, he wants to be loved. He doesn't need to be loved, quote unquote, right? Doesn't need to be loved. But if you are God and God is love, then love is a two-way street, right? It's yes, you can give and you can give and you can give, but it's so nice to give back, right? It's so nice to receive love in return. We understand that God loved us first. Absolutely, right? He has definitely been the pioneer here, right? He has done the sacrifice, but then he wants to be loved back. And I think it's so easy, it's so beautiful, and I can hardly wait to just be in that time when we're with God. And in fact, in my book, The Millennium Chronicles, Gary, I have this the scene when it's all said and done, kind of at this point in the scriptures. And I'm imagining, okay, but I'm imagining that God the Father is coming down off his throne, and he goes over to Adam and Eve. He says, "Hey, weren't we going to go for a walk?" They're like, "Yeah, that's right, we were. We were going to go for a walk, right? We had little hiatus in there, several thousand years, right? A little pause, but yeah, we were going to go for a walk, and now we're ready to go for a walk again." And when we go for that walk with the Lord, it will be like it's just him and I, right? It'll be like it's just you and God. It'll be like it's just the other person and God, right? We'll all think it's just me walking with God, and that there'll be a whole troop of us walking with God. And then what's going to happen? In my imagination, some lions come up, right? And they come and they pounce on us. And of course, they're not trying to kill us. They're just trying to play because they're big cats. The cats love to play. And, so they start licking us and all kinds of stuff. And then we have a mosh pile on God, and we're just, we're just having fun, right? I mean, like all your kids jumping on you, they're like, jump on dad, right? Mm-hmm. And then you just look up to the sky and you see the stars, and do you really know them all by name? Mm-hmm. You want to go see? Yeah, let's do it. Right? I mean, I get so excited about that. And maybe my imagination is completely off. I don't know. But I think I got the sense of God's heart. That's the sense that I'm getting, is that God can hardly wait to be with us when there's no more sin, there's no more selfishness, there's no more competition, there's no more slander, there's no more what's my neighbor doing, right? No, in the sense of I got to be better than my neighbor, I got to compete with my neighbor, I have to destroy my neighbor, right? But we're just all happy, right? We're all content. We've all got abundance beyond our wildest dreams, and all those thoughts of self, the kingdom of self, Satan's kingdom, is completely gone.
Wow.
And wow, what a day that is going to be.
Well, just like we started out this talk tonight, just as hard as it is to comprehend being face to face with God in our physical state, and not being, finding it hard to comprehend what that will be like. It's equally difficult for us to comprehend how this relationship is going to be, this love relationship is going to be when we're in eternity with him. And I love how you sort of characterize it in terms of the best of every type of relationship, the best relationship between a father and a child, the best in a relationship between a husband and a wife, the best in a relationship between best friends, the best, the beyond the best of any type of relationship, but only the good, only the love, only the fun, the joy, the
right.
Yeah.
Not the misunderstandings, not the offended and offending, right? None of that sense of, oh, he's trying to hurt me, or what's he really trying to say, right? And reading between the lines and all this stuff where, man, we tie ourselves into a knot in our relationships. We do this all the time, right? We do it on a personal relationship. We do it in our business relationships, our political relationships, always trying to get one up on the next guy. And all that is going to be gone. It's going to be fantastic. Yeah. We've got a question from Shemin. She asked, will life in the kingdom be a civilization based on agriculture? Again, is that why lack of rain will be the specific punishment? Yeah, Shemin, I think you hit the nail on the head there, that it's very much going to be about agriculture. And I'm very satisfied with that, because I think we're like, no, we got to have high-tech gadgetry and all this different stuff. But I think we're going to be completely unimpressed by the best of our technology today. The latest iPhone, the latest whatever gadget you've got, it'll be nothing. I really think that we're going to have peer-to-peer communication just through our thoughts, that we can send thought mail, to each other, that we won't need the high-tech stuff. The high-tech stuff is because we lack, because we have limitations. And certainly for those of us who have our new bodies, there will be no lack. We will not need, phones to to relay our communications. I don't know exactly how it's all going to happen, but it's going to be amazing. So, but understand that for the I was going to say the millennials, but for the mortals, okay, for the mortals who do not have their new body yet, agriculture will be very important because they are raising food. I don't get the sense that they're going to starve if they don't eat, but at least the yield of their crops will be less. The quality of their crops will be less. Maybe it won't be as tasty. I don't know exactly what that means, but there's something that they will miss out on if they don't come up. But the best thing that they're missing out on is God's presence. Like, that's the whole point. It's not about the rain. It's about God. And God wants them to be in a relationship with him. And so turning off the sprinklers is a way to get their attention and say, hey, you didn't come say hello, and I miss you. I want to know you, because there is a day coming at the end of this 1,000-year period where you'll have to make a decision. And I don't want you to choose the way of Satan as the world did for some 6,000 years or plus, right? I want you to be with me forever and ever. So this is really a wake-up call. This is an alarm. Hey, take note. Don't make that bad decision.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Every year he gives us this opportunity to come and say hello, the Feast of Tabernacles. And we should embrace that. So build your sukkah. If you've never celebrated the Feast of Tabernacles, open up and Google it, find out what it's about. You don't have to do it perfectly the first time. Do it from your heart. Don't get caught up in all the rules and regulations. Just go and begin somewhere. And of course, if you're in the Denver area watching us tonight, come and join us this Shabbat. We'll be celebrating the Feast of Sukkot this coming Saturday at 10:30.
Awesome. Well, God bless you guys. Take care.